Hello, everyone, and welcome to Mindshare Partners Expert Interview Series, where we highlight thought leaders in the workforce mental health movement. Today, I'm excited to speak with Yaminette Diaz-Linhart, a postdoctoral associate at the MIT Sloan School of Management with the Institute for Work and Employment Research and Work and Organization Studies. She recently co-authored a study on the relationship between worker voice, job quality, and well-being. So nice to have you with us, Yaminette.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All righty. So first, can you tell us a little bit about this research and what you found around the connection between worker voice and job quality?
Sure. First, I'd love to start with a study in 2019 by some colleagues here at the Institute for Work and Employment Research, where they found that workers in a kind of nationally representative sample, that workers really felt like they should have more say over aspects of their job than they currently have. And so part of what that kind of initiated in us is to try to understand how is kind of this idea of what we call a voice gap, how is kind of not having as much voice as you would want at work, how is that associated with quality employment and also with your well-being? And so my colleagues and I kind of first we developed this measure, a kind of a more streamlined measure of the voice gap, and then we empirically tested whether or not this was kind of associated with well-being over and above aspects of a quality job that we already know from existing research.
Mhm.
So essentially, things like monetary benefits like wages and non-monetary benefits like schedule control. So it's really exciting to think about voice as one of these kind of key aspects of quality employment, and that it really is associated with improved well-being. We found lower burnout, higher job satisfaction, lower intent to turnover, and higher psychological well-being.
And can you tell us a little bit more on that mechanism of how worker voice influences kind of well-being and burnout? What are the factors at play?
Yeah, so in this particular study, we didn't test a mechanism, but I can say
Mm.
from being a voice scholar that there's a lot of kind of different pathways that we would think about how this impacts well-being. So in our study, I would imagine if you feel like you should have more say at work than you currently have, you might start feeling frustrated. You might, just feel stressed. That might induce fatigue. And so this would kind of activate this kind of negative pathway toward well-being. And so it would increase burnout. And then you have essentially other voice research that talks about speaking up. So there is research, although it's limited, there's research that does find that speaking up kind of activates this energy generating pathway, that it kind of activates these positive emotional states, hope, enthusiasm, and then this leads to improved well-being. I think we are now in a place where sometimes it's hard for organizations to know what to do with so much voice. It is tough when you're getting a lot of input and when
Mhm.
employees are feeling like they want more say, but they're not having as much say over either their daily tasks or maybe some broader aspects of their job. I would just say that, we have so much research already that really has shown that voice actually improves productivity, performance, on the whole, right? On the whole, it's actually really good for organizations because employees want to be involved. They're invested in their work. And so when you have this kind of loss of voice, and this idea that employees won't speak up and this culture of silence, which is a related, there's a whole research based on silence, which is related, then you actually see increased burnout, for example, and you see losses in productivity, in performance. And so when employees are silencing or withdrawing, then this impacts not just their well-being, it impacts the organization as well.
I can imagine. So really contrasting having a bigger voice where you do feel invested, grand surprise, you're more likely to show up in work in a way that is conducive to working well versus feeling silenced is also probably not conducive to showing up at work in a way that where you do and function well. So you're kind of alluding, you kind of mentioned now feels hard. We're a little bit in an era where we're seeing, news, events, media that reflect this heavier influence of very top-down leadership. So I'm curious what you'd say to organizational leaders in this climate, and what are some practical and effective ways to improve worker voice?
So, I mean, just going back to this previous point, I think as leaders and organizational kind of strategists or any kind of top-down approach that you take, it really requires almost like hitting the pause button and just really reminding yourself as a leader and as part of that kind of strategic group that, again, if workers are speaking up, it's because they're invested in their work. They want something to change, and that is actually a good thing. um, Versus workers that are really disengaged and are either going to turn over and
Mm,
leave, or worse yet, they're gonna be like really terrible safety mistakes that can happen, or lower quality services or products. So the first thing is really almost just like reminding yourself as a leader, like this may feel a bit overwhelming, and also it's actually a good thing that workers and employees want to have a say. And then the second thing is really ensuring that workers know who can they speak up to if they wanted to. Are there these kind of what we call voice mechanisms? Are there suggestion boxes? Are there surveys? Are there team meetings? There should be some type of way that employees feel comfortable speaking up and voicing and raising issues or concerns or suggestions. And it should feel safe, right? There should be kind of this climate where if you speak up, then there isn't this kind of harm that's going to happen after you speak up. And speaking up is risky.
mm,
So, it is tough to know as an employee, when do you speak up and when do you not speak up? But for leaders to really consider how to create this supportive culture where speaking up is the norm, and it's okay. It's not just purely out of frustration. For example, it could foster innovation and creativity. Um, and then I think related to this is really just thinking about always looping back with
mm,
employees. So much research has really shown that employees, when they feel comfortable speaking up, when they're invested, it's great, except nothing changes. And then over time, you're just frustrated, and it can lead to burnout in some kind of serious cases. And I think we've all experienced that to some point where, you're being asked for input, and then you're in this, committee meeting, and then nothing changes, or they don't even take your input, but there's never any follow-up. And so it's just so critical, even if you don't align with what your kind of employees are asking, it's so critical just to be transparent about your decision making and to really see it as like employees are here collaborating with us as an organization, and it's really important for us to respect them by looping back with them, whatever the kind of feedback mechanism might be. And I think that's related probably to my last point, which is that there is an urge to resist, there's an urge to kind of decouple worker interests and organizational interests.
mm.
And I think it's really important to resist that, because yes, there is an inherent conflict, right, between like management and employee. And at the same time, we do have a lot of evidence for actual mutual gains that, what is good ultimately, like what is good for workers and employees is actually also beneficial for organizations.
Yeah, I've definitely seen, I think especially in the last 5 years, how it seems that tension or pendulum or whatever you call it, it seems to be increasingly at odds, or at least framed at odds. And I do appreciate that point, is that overwhelmingly the two kind of interests can and should be aligned. Amazing. Well, that concludes our time together. Thank you so much, Yeminette, for sharing your voice. We've included links to Yeminette and her work in the comments or description section below. As always, thank you all for watching.
Thank you.